In a world growing ever more dominated by cell phone photography, there's one camera that I believe will help turn the tides. The X100v is an APS-C fixed lens rangefinder style digital camera. I have been enamored with the X100 ever since the original one came out over 10 years ago. I was using a 5D at the time, and the small camera that I could take everywhere that had just as good image quality and such a small form factor was absolutely incredible. The X100 for me became the first camera that I truly would take anywhere. It's one of my favorite cameras of all time. 23mm, which is a 35mm equivalent on full frame, is to me the perfect focal length. You can do anything with 23mm. It's not too wide, it's not too tight. You can do portraits, you can get environmental shots. It's literally the best all-around lens in my opinion. I think the design of the X100v is awesome. The lines are sharp and clean. It's weather sealed now. The way the tilt screen is integrated into the back of the camera is amazing. It looks so flush and just so well integrated that it's hard to tell that it actually does even flip out. Being $1,400, this camera is not exactly an entry-level camera. If you can't afford $1,400 for this, really consider looking at the older versions of this camera because they're still fantastic. But I think that it's a cool object that you just want to take with you and always play with and use. That's going to make you a better photographer. If you use your camera, if you make images, you're going to get better. And personally, I think this camera makes me want to use it. The limitation of the 23mm lens will make you think more creatively. You'll focus on composition, you have to move your feet, you have to move your angles, you need to move around to use this camera. And the fact that it has an optical viewfinder, I think, is a really great way of composing images because you can see what's happening outside of your frame, especially for street photography. If you want to capture a moment, you can see outside. It's easier to open both eyes because the viewfinder's on the left side. It's just a perfect tool for taking photography more seriously. What I love about the X100v so much is that it's a fun camera to use. Where a cell phone is just an extremely convenient camera, this camera is actually fun to hold, it's fun to use, it's novel, and it just makes me excited to go out and use it. It makes me feel like I'm going out to create art, where a phone just feels like I'm randomly documenting something to remember later, just taking a picture of a receipt or something. Where this camera really makes you feel creative, just the way that you use it, the way that it looks, the images that it produces, the limitation of the fixed lens, all culminate into this really creative, inspirational device. This kind of camera, to me, it might not to you, but to me, it really inspires me to go out and use it. And honestly, that's what a camera should do. I want to enjoy using it. I want to be inspired to go use it. I want to be excited to go use it. And this camera does that for me. I pick it up and I'm like, man, I want to go and make some really cool images with this, and it just makes me feel creative just holding it. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think the way that we use cameras, the physical touching, the physical object of a camera, I think that is what is going to get people interested in actual cameras as opposed to a cell phone, which is infinitely more convenient. The physical experience of using it, the way the buttons feel, the way the shutter sounds, the way the experience of holding it and using it is what is going to differentiate the experience of a cell phone over a camera. And I think those things aren't superfluous, and they really should be considered when designing a camera. You know, this is how you're going to win people over to making that jump to a real camera. One of the best aspects of the X100v is the colors that you can get in camera. People wax poetic about the CCD sensors of the past, that the M9 sensor is just this absolutely magical color machine that has never been reproduced again. But to me, Fuji's colors are the best I've ever seen out of a camera. Fuji has taken great care in replicating some of their previous film stocks, the color profiles of those, and then put those into these cameras. Essentially, you're getting filters that you can apply in camera that aren't garish and don't look ridiculous and look like actual professional film stocks. One of the best aspects of that is that you can actually customize these and tune the color to exactly how you like it in camera. The fact that you can get a camera that takes incredible images that you don't need to edit is amazing, and it's a huge benefit to the X100. I think this would be an incredible selling point if you're a beginner and you're not really competent at editing your photos, or you don't think they turn out as well as other people's photos. This camera will give you an incredible look in camera that you don't have to mess around with, and you'll get images that look amazing and they look professional, and you'll be really proud of them. There's a website called Fuji X Weekly, which aggregates a bunch of Fuji film recipes, which essentially are lists of settings that you can adjust in the camera to achieve a specific color look. People have tried to recreate a bunch of different film stocks inside the camera using its built-in image adjustment settings. So if you don't really feel confident going in and making these adjustments to the color yourself, you can go and find these recipes. They even have an app. You can look at these different recipes and then just input them into your camera, and then you essentially have built-in looks for all of your photos that you don't need to touch after you take the picture. In addition to using the film recipes in camera, I also edit a lot of these photos with my Lightroom preset packs. I'm happy to announce that I just released a third preset pack, so you can find that and the previous two over on my website, gxace.com. So I know I just said that the X100 has a fixed 23mm lens, but Fuji does actually make two conversion lenses that turn this into either a wide angle or a telephoto camera. This is pretty cool and a little different than normal teleconverter lenses because these are made specifically for the 23mm lens of this camera, and they don't work for anything else. So they're essentially taking the elements of the 23mm lens on this camera and using those in combination with the other elements of the converter to create an entirely new lens. This is better than a normal converter, which doesn't really take into account the specific optics of whatever lens it's using and aren't really as good. This camera can truly become a 28mm equivalent and truly become a 50mm equivalent, which I think is actually really cool. The 50mm equivalent I did buy and I think is really awesome. Like, it really truly makes it into a 33mm lens or a 50mm equivalent on full frame. And you get more shallow depth of field, you get a tighter field of view, and it's a really cool lens addition that doesn't lower the quality of the lens at all. The only real downside to this conversion lens is that it's pretty huge. It really throws the balance of this camera off, and the front element is like absurdly large. It's a 67mm filter thread. I took it with me on a 2-day backpacking trip in northern Michigan. The images that it took were amazing. I loved the image quality. It wasn't too annoying annoying to just unscrew it real quick to take a shot with the 23mm, but it did get a little annoying because of how front heavy it was while backpacking. It is possible to travel with it. It's not the ideal 50mm X100 that I know a lot of people want. It's a little expensive. It's like $250, but I think it is a fun thing to play around with if you just want to see what a 50mm X100 would be like. Now, one of the biggest issues with this camera that I've never seen anybody else talk about, if you shoot this camera at the highest shutter speed, wide open, you actually see the leaf shutter in the bokeh, and it completely ruins the bokeh. You can see in this picture that the bokeh is weirdly wedge shaped. That is the actual leaf shutter showing up in the bokeh of the image. This is due to the fact that the shutter isn't moving fast enough at that highest shutter speed to clear the entire sensor. So what you see is essentially a cutout of that shutter in the bokeh of the image. Now this looks terrible in my opinion. It looks really, really bad, and I've never heard anybody else talk about this issue. If you turn on the ND filter, this is completely not an issue. It's completely resolved. It's just disappointing that you can't use the maximum shutter speed on this camera without this issue manifesting. My only two desires for a future X100 camera is that they adopt the hidden screen from the X Pro 3. I wish that was on this camera so badly. It would make it so much more fun to use. And I hope that they make the 23mm lens a 1.4. If they did that and added the hidden LCD screen, this would by far be the best camera ever made. It already is, but it would be even more so if they did those two things. I think this camera is absolutely perfect for somebody who's looking to take photography more seriously. If you're only using a cell phone and you really want to make a jump to a camera, I think there's a compelling argument to start with this camera. What you can learn from using a camera like this will outweigh buying sort of a cheaper interchangeable lens camera. It'll make you think differently and take your photography a little more seriously. Because you can take it anywhere, it's absolutely awesome for learning because you'll always want to use it. It's not going to be a burden to take with you. You don't want to lug around a big DSLR or a big interchangeable lens camera with a huge lens on the front of it. I take this camera everywhere. I take it to the grocery store, I take it to the bank, I go anywhere, I take this camera. And I wouldn't do that with a big A7S III with like a huge lens or an A7R4. I'm not going to take that with me everywhere. It's just too annoying. But this camera being so small, I will take it anywhere. And if you have a camera with you, you're going to use it more often. If you want to take it with you, you're going to use it more often. It's just so fun to use, and it's so light, and it's so small, and it's so convenient that I always want to use it. The experience of using the optical viewfinder is novel, yes, but it's different in a great way. It just makes photography feel more engaging. It's interesting because you're seeing the world as you're taking a photograph. You're not just seeing a screen, you're actually seeing the world. That's a really interesting way to take photos. It's definitely different in this age of cell phones and electronic viewfinders. It's novel, and I think it helps alter your mind in a small way. That's what you need to be creative. You need to see the world in a different light. You need to see the world with different eyes. And I think that this camera is the perfect way to do that.